And so he says this on Joe Rogan. And I was like, oh, come on. And Stanford Combs' response was, well, come on, Renee, it's not exactly in the Washington Post. This is where you realize that the institutions don't understand where public opinion is formed.
Game begin.
You're listening to Technocracy for Dummies. Does the word technocracy make you feel like a dummy? Me too. I'm your host, Sam Simon, and I haven't been offered candy by a stranger in years. But I do often fall into the trap of uncritically believing what's served to me by the algorithm, which might be the modern-day version of the conundrum. In the last decade, the term fake news entered the mainstream and now seems to dominate many people's perception of most news. What information can be trusted these days? Here to give us a better grasp on the circulation of the information economy is researcher, professor, and writer Renée DiResta. She's currently a professor at Georgetown, but previously worked at the Stanford Internet Observatory, studying the negative ways people interact online. You probably remember claims of foreign interference in the 2016 election through Facebook. She presented that data to Congress and encouraged them to put greater stock into the power of online misidentification and distribution systems. I wanted to talk with her on Technocracy for Dummies because she understands how modern propaganda is produced and circulated. My feed can feel like it's exclusively trying to sell me a lifestyle or political opinion or product, all of which have ideologies attached, which one click might push me ever closer to buying into. And the government sure as shit is not creating any guardrails to help us discern reality from AI. Renée is here to help identify how the algorithm, bad actors, and bots are directly shaping our worldviews and what we can do to push back against it. Welcome to the podcast, Renée DiResta.
Nice to have you. I'm sorry, I'm like talking as if it's mine. Nice to be here.
Thanks for coming. I'm very excited to talk to you because I'm super invested in meme research, which I think fits pretty well with how you're interested in information being conveyed. Because this is Technocracy for Dummies, I was wondering, how do you see number systems and efficiency, especially garnered from online data sources, being used in our current government as a weapon of technocracy or discrimination?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's something that you learn about in data science or statistics 101, which is how to lie with charts and graphs. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can use numbers or statistics or trends to put out bullshit. Bullshit is now, it's a canonical term that we're allowed to use because Henry Frankfurt wrote a book called On Bullshit, so we're allowed to say it now. These two things are related. They're trending approximately at the same time, ergo this one caused that one. And it's not true at all, but you can make a graph, you can throw it up there on the internet, and it'll go viral, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone will post it. There was a video that went viral of a YouTuber named Nick Shirley who drove all around Minnesota going to these daycares, and they were closed. Many of them were closed. This was over a holiday week. So there's some questions about how many of them were closed because they were fraudulent versus how many of them were closed because it was a holiday. But one of the things that he did that was very interesting was at the bottom of the screen before getting to the daycare, before you learn anything else, is he posts how much money they received from the government. Now, you don't know anything about the government program. You don't know anything about what the money was spent on. You really know nothing if you're an average person about why the federal government gives money to daycares. All you see is a very large number. And so you see the very large number, and then you see a closed building. And so he's making a connection between a large number and a closed building, and it creates the impression that millions of dollars are being wasted. Now, is there some fraud? Probably. Is that the fraud that he is documenting? It seems like the answer is no, but there's that link that you manage to make in somebody's mind between a large number and then an image that you put on a screen, and you create this association in very effective but not necessarily honest and above board ways.
I was digging into your profile, and it seems like you took on a lot of like your data research projects on your own. I'm thinking especially about the work that you're doing with social media platforms, because for a lot of the like structural data with that, you would need to be an insider at the platform, but you're an outsider. How do you gather that data? Or especially when you're like working with phenomena, are you looking at the posts and like the qualities of the posts the poster, the qualities of the poster, or something else that's more structural, that's a part of the network?
So both is the answer. For outsiders who are not part of a platform, you could 10 years ago actually get a fair bit of stuff. You could create a developer account, you would get API keys, and you could actually pull stuff from, for example, Twitter. There were people who would scrape also, or you could use third-party tools that would gather data. There were social listening tools that started emerging that were really built for brands. Social listening is the weird name for them to have landed on, but it's because brands started realizing that influencers, which was a term that was only just starting to come out at that time, were really good at connecting with audiences. And so brands who wanted to sell shoes or whatever would want to know who was influential in a network or in a community. And so with something like Twitter, this was very, very visible. You could just see, hey, this person, this, let's say just like node in a network, has a whole lot of followers. And when they say something, it gets retweeted and you can see this person over here picks it up and then it continues to move. And so you could trace where a message went. And by 2015, you could look at distinct communities. So you could look at clusters, people who talked about the same thing. And then you had platforms like Facebook where it was a lot harder to get data out. They had a tool called CrowdTangle, and that was for researchers and journalists. So anybody on the internet could use Twitter's data, but platforms like Facebook or Instagram made it a little bit more difficult. And that was because they had a number of these sort of high profile issues. Cambridge Analytica was probably the biggest one, where people would create apps and then mass scrape data, getting tons and tons of information from the people using the platform. Facebook had this thing.
Facebook always has a thing.
You would go onto Facebook and you would take quizzes. And it was like a very big thing. It would be like, what kind of animal are you? Like, they're the stupidest things. But everybody loves personality quizzes. And so you would do the personality quiz and you'd get a badge for your platform. And you would tag your friends at the end before you see your results, right? So that's the hook. And some of the ones that were like really unethical would actually just, through gaps or holes in some of the data controls on Facebook early on, they could actually pull data from your friends through the Facebook social graph API.
Even without interacting with the quiz.
So the way in which Facebook inadvertently made it possible for people to get information about other people who did not actively take the quiz themselves for this period in time, that was a real thing. So Facebook eventually locks this down and stops making that possible. So there are these different ways that platforms treat what kind of data you can get as an outsider. Eventually, Facebook creates very specific tools for academic researchers, for journalists, and for people who it considers to be like vetted. They're allowed very specific types of access that presumably someone on the back end has some visibility into what you're doing.
So you were using that kind of way in, like an academic researcher approved by Facebook?
In the early days of my work, I was the complete outsider doing just this is what I think I'm seeing. And then in 2019, when I went to Stanford, I moved into the academic with academic access.
Gotcha.
So they didn't launch the academic tools until around 2018.
How have recent attacks on research, like generally, but online hate speech research, especially, and the work you did with Stanford Internet Observatory, impacted your field, or at a larger scale, the media landscape for the American people?
During COVID, platforms had a whole bunch of different things that they considered to be violative content. We would occasionally say, hey, this rumor over here seems to violate your terms of service. They would slap a label on it. All of these sorts of things got reframed as censorship, right? The Twitter files happened. Matt Taibbi got this kind of privileged access to Twitter's internal emails. And Matt Taibbi took several of those emails and he cut them in half. And he released like snippets of them, right? And he pretended that the part that he cut off said something that it didn't say. So in one particular instance, he posted an email where he claimed it was a list of categories that Stanford demanded Twitter censor. And it was nothing of the sort. It was a list of categories where we said, hey, these are things that we're looking at. Which of these are of interest to you? But when he framed it as, this is a list of categories that Stanford demanded Twitter censor, That went wildly viral, right? And we get a subpoena from Jim Jordan.
Right.
And then we have to...
So positioned, your academic research requests were positioned as like
censorship demands.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, censorship demands. Yeah. So when you take an email and you cut it in half and it goes from, these are things we're looking at, is this of interest to you? And that's reframed as, these are categories that stand for demanded Twitter or censor. All of a sudden, we have to then turn over all of our emails and records. And the other thing that happens is you get sued. So we got sued. Mm-hmm. Those lawsuits are still going on. I can't really talk about them, but one of them was from Stephen Miller and America First Legal. And
awesome guy to be in contact with.
So we get sued. And when you get sued, your lawyers will tell you, shut up and say nothing. And so even as the sort of right-wing bullshit machine is off spinning this email as a censorship demand letter.
Mm-hmm. And it's from the academy.
Right. We're over here saying this never happened, but we're saying that in amicus briefs to the Supreme Court. We're saying that in legal filings. And we're not defending ourselves on Twitter. We're not defending ourselves in the court of public opinion. So in the court of public opinion, you have Matty with his half an email.
And because you're not defending yourself, then the court of public opinion can continue to be like, they're guilty.
The thing that was most frustrating about it, though, was that the Democrats and the liberal institutions didn't see it for what it was. And so I think that's the other piece of it that needs to be reckoned with.
What do you mean by that?
The liberal institutions didn't see this as a thing they had to defend against. This is something I've been writing a lot about over the last year since the Internet Observatory got shut down, because that was the effect of this, right? Mm-hmm. Which is that you saw it with the CDC during COVID. You saw it with what happened to us. You've seen it perhaps with the response from people in foreign aid to the attacks on USAID or any number of institutions when the administration rolled over. They still operate under this perception that, oh, the truth will find its way out eventually. Oh, if I get one sentence into the Washington Post or the New York Times, I give one quote, that's where public opinion is formed. They don't see it as fighting for public opinion in the arena where public opinion is actually formed today, right? Which is on online, social media. Yeah. When Elon started the Twitter files, it wasn't that people had a small suspicion that they were being censored. They were already 100% convinced that they were being censored. Mm-hmm. What Matt was doing was just giving them the proof of this thing that they already believed.
Right.
None of what happened in the Twitter files was an actual investigation. It was just
cutting and pasting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's shopping for receipts. You're skipping the investigation. You're skipping the full facts of the matter and going, hey, I found the 6 words in this email that I can use to reframe this situation in the way that I want to present it to you anyway. And that's what propaganda has always been, right? Mm-hmm. It's not making something up out of whole cloth, connecting it back again to the Minnesota situation. Is there fraud in some daycare out there? Absolutely, 100%. I'm sure there is. Is it the way that it was presented in that video? No. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is like direct interference by our current technocrats in your field of research.
This is where you realize that the institutions don't understand. They don't understand where public opinion is formed.
Yeah.
I remember one moment where Michael Schellenberger, one of the other guys who wrote the Twitter files, went on Joe Rogan and just said a whole bunch of stuff that was just like complete bullshit. Where he's talking about all of these things like censoring 22 million tweets and all of these nonsense numbers. Again, take a number completely out of context, spin it into something it never was.
And people are like, look at the numbers.
Right, look at the numbers. And that number came from our report. We, after the election, added up the number of tweets related to the most viral stories, the things that everybody heard about: Dominion voting machines, Hammer and scorecard, this crazy conspiracy theory that space lasers were changing votes. These huge, most viral stories of the 2020 election, we added up the number of tweets related to those stories, and the number was 22 million. We wrote that number in a report, and then they took that number and they said that was the number of tweets we had censored.
Got it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So you take a real number that you can screenshot, and then you say that it means something completely different. Mm-hmm. And so he says this on Joe Rogan. And I was like, oh, come on,
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, so that's like, what, 12 million people?
Yeah, most popular podcast in the world, whatever, at least in the
right,
US.
And I've done Joe Rogan, and I was like, okay, come on, we should be responding to this like on Joe Rogan. And
hit him back in the same arena.
In the same arena. And Stanford Combs' response was, well, come on, Renee, it's not exactly in the Washington Post. And I thought, oh my God. And I said, I'm going to toss a fact check up on Substack. And they didn't understand why I would want to do that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's like, of course it matters. It absolutely matters.
And this is the precise place where it matters, where you can like garner enough clicks to maybe combat it.
And it was wild to me to have that fight. And the thing that's really funny is that Rock cites my Substack as the correction to that rumor now. When you're saying like, what is the AI going to point to when it comes to correcting the record on that? It's not going to go grab the random one-sentence quote in the Washington Post, which they didn't want to give anyway because they didn't consider it like worthy of a rebuttal. Yes, they just don't consider that ecosystem to be real, authentic opinion shaping. And watching that disconnect play out was like, oh my God, I've spent a decade now looking at rumors and narrative shaping, and you just see it happen with your name in it. And you realize that the institution just doesn't know what it's doing. And so the situation's going to suck, but to make lemonade out of it, let me start writing about what the institutions need to do differently.
Yeah, it's disheartening. But on the bright side of the democratization of the internet, at least everyone getting a voice means everyone gets a voice.
Yeah, you can use yours, and you have to use yours. I think that's one of the key things here. I think that for institutions in particular, you have to be able to fight in the court of public opinion and to recognize that when somebody takes a statistic and decontextualizes it, the best way to respond is not even to sit there and fight with the fact check. It's actually to point out that they just decontextualized the statistic. It's to point out how the lie works. In my opinion, that's one of the most effective ways to do it. You do both. You say, look, if you want the fact check, that's over here, but let me tell you like why this works. Let me tell you what they just did. And that I think is actually really critical also.
Is this something that like the average person can take into their own hands, like who don't have access to the Twitter files?
This is why there's such a war over Wikipedia right now. When I go to X, people really trust the AI. You can see the chat response on X shift its response styles very directly in response to Elon saying things like, okay, we have to de-wokify Grok again.
Yeah.
So you can actually see very clearly what one man putting his thumb on the training of the AI does to it. And you would think that that would make people more aware of just how contingent upon the training data and process it actually is. But there is still such a high degree of trust there. And it's because the AI is synthesizing the information for you as opposed to you having to go and do the work. The training data is so heavily rooted in what's on Wikipedia that now you're seeing a lot of efforts to undermine confidence in Wikipedia. This is why Grokipedia exists also.
Oh my God.
As that question of what is a reliable source becomes critical, not only for information that you might get ranked in a search engine, but what you get second order from the bot as it responds to what information it's trained on or what information it's retrieving.
For generative AI like Sora or Grok that are like so heavily influenced by their purveyors, like the way that Musk can say something and Grok will respond, and their purveyors' views have been weaponized to produce like specifically political content and political propaganda. Like I'm sure you remember the Sora made video of Trump shitting all over his constituents at the No Kings rally, stuff like that. When the overwhelming relevant output of one of these platforms is used as political propaganda, is it at all like useful or accurate to consider these tools propagandistic or propaganda machines? Or is that like saying the printing press was used to make a lot of propaganda, so it's propagandistic?
One of the first things the printing press was used for was the pamphleteering wars and the 30 Years' War. So you did actually see the printing press used as a tool of propaganda between the Catholics and the Protestants. That was one of its earliest use cases. So with Sora, there is a ton of just random entertainment that comes out of it. I always say that you can use a hammer to build a house or to hit somebody with. It can be a tool or a weapon. So the question, though, is what kind of guardrails do you put on it, or how do you handle the deception component? At SIO, we had early access to GPT-3, so the model before ChatGPT was released to the public. So researchers had some early visibility into what was going to happen. And in 2020, I had it co-author something in The Atlantic with me, where I actually fed it some of my stuff and asked it to write some stuff in the body of the article and the conclusion of the article. I always hate writing conclusions. I was like,
they're the worst part.
I was like, oh, this is really cool. Actually, it generated some conclusions that didn't suck. And I was like, huh. Actually, now, funny enough, I find it generates like really terrible conclusions, but you can sort of tell
shitification.
The sort of, like the slipperiness of the language, where I'm like, you can tell it's AI.
Too many M dashes.
But the thing that was interesting for me, I was like, oh, this is going to be an incredible tool for propaganda. Because at the time, we were doing this investigation into Russian propaganda blogs pretending to be Syrian media outlets. This was during the war in Syria. And the way that they were getting found out was that they were screwing up. They were plagiarizing sometimes because they needed to produce so much content that they were plagiarizing real content, or they were screwing up the vernacular. And so that was how they were getting found. And I was like, this tool solves both of those problems. I can generate tons and tons of stuff very quickly, and it produces it in the vernacular that I want it written in. Here it is writing like me.
It's terrifying.
And I was like, so that means it can sound like anything. So if you want it in the relevant slang of a Syrian girl and, of whatever age she's supposed to be in, whatever neighborhood she's supposed to live in, like, you're going to be able to get that pretty soon. And so these tells are going to go away. And that's what you're seeing. We had the Maduro situation. Yeah. And some of the videos that went viral on X were people supposedly celebrating in the streets. And they're completely fake. And they're fooling people. And we knew this was going to happen. We've been saying it for 5 years, longer than that. Actually, I think since 2018, we've been writing about what's going to happen here. And the problem is not that the technology exists. Everybody knew that this was going to be the side effect of it. The problem is that nothing is really being done to educate people on the fact that it is happening. So you make the video, everybody knows it's going to be shared on X, but the guy who runs X doesn't want to do the work of having anything to surface a watermark built in. So even if it's made on Sora, you could have something that surfaces the Sora watermark and just throws a little indicator up that says, hey, this was made on Sora. People who really want to strip out the watermark and do the hard work of that are going to be able to do that. But you can actually kind of surface for the low-hanging fruit there. So there's not a lot of work that was done on education or detection. And we had 7 years to get ahead of it, and yet again we chose not to do that, so here we are.
Is there a way that like the average user can do better at recognizing and trying to like avoid like participating or circulating these propaganda traps?
At this point, it is really hard to tell, and I say that as somebody who looks at this stuff day in, day out. What I do is whenever I see a video that it grabs me for some reason with some kind of emotional hook, whether that makes me mad or sad or whatever, usually mad, I do spend the extra couple minutes to just see, is there any other angle that this footage was shot from, right? Because right now, it's still rare to see a generated video where they do the work of giving you multiple angles. Whereas if it's a real event, multiple people will likely have got it on their camera phones. Give that another year. And you will see people who will say, generate me 3 different camera angles of the same video. But right now, I think you're still usually going to get just the one shot. And then the other thing is you look at the little details. You will see is old footage recirculated as if it is happening in that moment. That's the other thing. Sometimes it's not AI generated, it's just recirculated. And if you look at things like license plates, it'll often get badges wrong. Or if somebody's wearing a jersey, I went and looked up the name and number of the person that was on the jersey to see, does this match? But this is not a normal thing for people to do, and that's the problem. You're really asking people to do a whole lot. So,
like critical scrolling.
It's really a crazy amount of effort. It's one thing if you're a person where it's your job to do this, but otherwise I think the question is more, what do I get out of sharing this before I know if it's real or not? And that's a different question.
Which I have actually a question about, because you have this great term, amplaganda. I think you coined it. I was like, that's so good. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this shift in the way that propaganda can be circulated that I think is very relevant.
So I think it's a question of a lot of people genuinely just want to either warn their communities or feel like they're doing something for a cause. And one way that you can do that is by hitting the share button, hitting the retweet button, stitching, quote tweeting, whatever it is. And that's a function of just being a participant in the moment by sharing it. And usually you do that when you're outraged.
Yeah, this is like very relevant to the like performative activism waves that come and go.
Yeah. The question there is really, and this has been happening for a long time, but it's, did you take that extra beat to just go see, is this real? Did this happen? And it really does, I think, get people who are very well-meaning, like across the political spectrum, where they just think, I saw this thing, it really pissed me off, ergo I shared it. And that is the challenge. And it happens to everybody. I mean, I've definitely done it too. Just think like, oh boy, here we are again.
Yeah, and we're vulnerable.
And that's why I think the most effective propaganda has always appealed to people in their identity as a member of a group. That sort of identity function that makes somebody decide to go out and share that video, be a part of that moment, be a part of that group. Whereas oftentimes you do see that if you just wait another hour, some new footage or something will emerge, and it's not necessarily as cut and dry as you maybe first thought.
Is there a piece of propaganda that, according to my identitarian data points, like white, female, Northeast, like college age, is there one that you can think of that I'm likely to have fallen for?
I think a lot of times there's like the stereotypes. It's so hard to know what somebody's politics are based on these big overarching thematic things, where oftentimes it is the questions of what is most likely to be appealing, or what are the things that are hardest for a member of a group to push back against, right? And we can stick with the fraud in Minnesota situation. I was reading some of the reactions to the video on Reddit, where there were people who were on the left in Minnesota who were saying, man, this really sucks because I know that there is a grain of truth to it. And I am afraid that if I acknowledge that I am then approving of these tactics, that I am approving of what is happening here, or that I am then like giving the right a point. And so you see that question of,
can I give an inch? Yeah.
Right, exactly. It really moves people into these, like, we must be absolutely entrenched in this thing. And that unfortunately means that the grain of truth piece means that you can't then move past it by saying, this is true, and also let me tell you about what this video did. And that, I think, is where you get to a politics of just complete, utter, total lock-in, as opposed to this is where there is a reality, and now let's talk about what happened over here. And I think you see that concern expressed more on the left, which is good. Because I was looking at the efforts to tie Nicolas Maduro to like stealing the 2020 election, and I was like, oh my God, we're doing this again. And I don't see a whole lot of people central to the right pushing back on that. I just see this going viral and getting tens of thousands of likes. You want to keep that ability to have pushback, to have that recognition that we are here in reality, as opposed to what is happening in the propagandaverse. You've just started to see some people like Ben Shapiro pointing out that the conspiratorial nature have entirely engulfed the movement, and that was something that I thought was very interesting to see that expressed on stage at Turning Point USA.
Do you have like an incredible internal bullshit thermometer, or it's just about corroborating, cross-checking your sources, like you said, trying to find other angles, or just trying to seek out more nuance in what you read?
So first of all, I recognize that I'm not an expert in many topics, right? There are certain areas where I'm like, this is not a thing where I am equipped to weigh in on. I think explaining how shopping for receipts works is something that is worth explaining, using that video as a case study. I'll do a lot of, here is how a video works, here is why this thing on X is interesting, from the standpoint of explaining a particular rhetorical move or explaining a particular propaganda style.
Is that not you being an influencer sort of in response?
Possibly, yeah. I try to be very careful. The reason that I'm really careful to use terms like rumors and not misinformation, and have been for a very long time now, probably since 2020 or so, COVID really brought this home for me also, is that there's certain things that we just can't know in the moment. And this is something that social media has accelerated that I think people are very uncomfortable with, which is when you open your phone, you don't necessarily get to relieve that anxiety of not knowing in the moment. If you followed the story of that terrible shooting at Brown, where people were trying to figure out who did it, there was a couple day period where there were different suspects who were named. And one of them was a person of interest who was named by the police. And that person was cleared. But in the time when that person was named, there was another person who had the same name, whose face was different, but was also a fellow member of the military, whose face was all of a sudden all over social media. And this was the sort of situation where you could see people who thought that they had found the guy's LinkedIn profile very gleefully sharing it because he was a white guy, member of the military. They were sort of thrilled, actually, that this was like the stereotypical like right-wing mass shooter that they thought they had found. And when you said, this is not even the person, right? CNN has a different face up. There was a reluctance to take it down because it was getting a lot of likes. And that's where you see like the sort of social validation, what social media does to people in these moments. That clout, that feeling of being first, of being right. And you could see that as that name goes away, as the police say, this is not our person, that's immediately forgotten. So the fallout that those two people have to deal with, right? The falsely named person whose face is on CNN, and then the guy with the same name whose face is all over social media, like they have to deal with that. Then the right lands on this random LGBTQ Palestinian person.
Oh, great.
Right? And then their face is all over X. And there too, you see that they've just grabbed this random person, and the university or somebody, maybe it was them, starts taking down their social profiles. And then they decide that that's evidence of a cover up. And then this person is going through that. And so in that moment, I felt like, okay, let me write something explaining this phenomenon. Let me just explain. Now, do I have any idea who did it? No. Do I have any idea of who it's going to turn out to be? No. But you can at least explain what this process looks like, why people do this, what that validation experience is like, why when you participate in this, you actually are having like a profound impact on somebody's life. This is not a game for any of the three men who were mentioned, right? And so that is just trying to like reinforce for people that you're just going along with your crowd, first on the left, then on the right. But what you do actually has a really profound impact on the lives of these people. And I think that we see this depersonalization happen so often that if I can explain that phenomenon and how it works, and if it does make somebody think just a little bit about doing it, then maybe that's the best way to address it, as opposed to playing whack-a-mole with the rumor itself. It doesn't do me any good to write, it wasn't John Smith. Like, the media can do that. For me, it's better to write about why does this happen? What is the social role this rumor functions as? Why do people go and do this? And what might you do differently?
How have you seen the like online media, and especially maybe you use the word rumor, landscape change since COVID? Because especially with this depersonalization effect, I feel like for a while, at least in 2020, 2021, when it felt like everyone's inside and everyone's on the internet, it felt much more personable, at least for a period of time. Like, you could believe the people that you're talking to, maybe in your online communities, were real people and not like, you know, the age-old don't trust anyone you meet on the internet. Like, no, you're a real person and you're stuck inside too. I don't know. I was in online communities during COVID, but
I was too. I had a baby in August of 2020, and I spent a lot of time on Clubhouse. I don't know if you remember that. The voice chat rooms that started.
Yes, totally.
When you have a baby, you're like up all hours of the night. And I would wake up to feed her and just like hop on a Clubhouse room because I had to keep myself awake. And it was kind of nice. There was always like somebody talking or some room, and you could hear real people's voices, and you don't lose context in quite the same way. People don't pile on. Like, the room moderators were pretty good. Even in the debate rooms, I would join some of the debate rooms, and they actually felt quite friendly. It was nice. And like, man, did that die?
Yeah, like happened since then. Now it's like there's no one on the internet except bots.
Well, there's a huge amount of residual resentment. There's a lot of fracturing also, where for the point about, do you push back against the loudest member in your group that people are not likely to respond to, when something becomes like an identity marker, right? Which we did see with
mask versus not mask.
Yeah, masks is a good one, where you go to X, sometimes you'll still see people fighting about masks. And it feels like it's become much more of a big deal now that it's over. And there's this disconnect and almost like these false memories that have been made the most vocal recollection of the thing. And that has become the most vocal voices in some of these communities. And it just doesn't reflect or comport with what I remember from the time. And at the same time, I really don't know if it is an accurate recollection for the people who are in those communities, or if it's a function of them not wanting to push back against the most vocal representative members of their community. So I'd be curious to see what the actual polling is, but you do see that sometimes, that disconnect where polling will look like one thing versus what you see on the biggest accounts on X or what's trending on social media will say something completely different. And that's because when you ask people the question versus what is most visually represented among the most loud or large or most retweeted accounts is two completely different things.
Do you think that this has influenced the general online media landscape?
I do. There's a phenomenon, the 99-1 phenomenon, where 90% of people on a social network lurk, 9% occasionally contribute, and 1% produce the majority of the content. Chris Bell from Duke writes about it in some of his papers, and a few other people have done these very meticulous studies of it on social media, where the average person is not the average person you see on Twitter. Like, this is just not the same thing, particularly now that it's monetized, when the 1% are out there trying to shape public opinion, trying to like tap into the algorithm. What is the algorithm rewarding? It's rewarding sensationalism, or it's rewarding moral language. Or if you want a YouTube video to go somewhere, you make the video that looks very sensational, that has like, we found $100 million in fraud. Yeah, exactly. Or the clip of big wide eyes.
Yeah,
like,
the Kevin from Home Alone face.
Exactly.
Hey, I want to go back to the ampliganda thing. I was thinking about a couple of different theories of yours that I read, and I don't know if they're theories or just modes of making sense of the data, but I was wondering if you see a relationship between the content versus structure breakdown and the ampliganda versus propaganda breakdown.
In order to have big amplification channels, you need to have a social platform structure that sends things very far. There was a post that I saw this morning that I've seen a couple times now, which was talking about how Threads, a sort of Twitter competitor that Facebook started, based on the numbers, it has the same number of, I believe it was daily active users, on par with and surpassing Twitter, according to this statistic, this graph that had come out. And the person was commenting that it's very interesting to see these usage numbers, because Threads does not seem to occupy any kind of headspace in the political discourse whatsoever. Like, nobody says,
or
I
even
saw
in
it
the
on
media
Threads.
discourse.
Yes, right. Nobody's ever like, I saw this thing on Threads. It has no cultural salience. And yet, these are the numbers. And I don't think that the numbers are faked in any way. And I am on Threads. And my experience of Threads is so confusing because the algorithm puts you into these different pockets of the Threads community, and it's so disjointed. For a very long time, I was in tech Threads, which I think is probably where I belong. And then all of a sudden, I was in vaccine Threads, public health Threads. Okay, cool. I can see how it would belong here. And then I made a post on my son's birthday about a cake I had baked him. And you know that show, Is It Cake?
Yep.
Okay. So my husband made it, not me. I took him out of the house to distract him for 5 hours.
Which is
my husband made him
an equal challenge.
A very important contribution. I took him to the mall. And my husband made this cake that looked like a bowl of Fruit Loops. It was very cool. And I posted this cake, which looked like a bowl of Fruit Loops. And I happened to mention my son doesn't really love cake, but he loves this show. Mm-hmm. And my post wound up like breaking containment out of like the people who follow me and stuff. And it landed in what I can only describe as like toxic parenting threads. And all of a sudden, all of these people who must have had terrible childhoods, like landed in my replies.
That's scary.
Screaming at me about how I had made my son a cake when he didn't like cake. Right?
Oh, that's what it's about. Not that you were tricking your son.
Well, that too. But it was mostly that I had said that he doesn't love cake. And I had made him a cake. And oh my God. So
oh my God.
And I responded back to a couple of these people, like very caustically, like F yourself, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't like torture my son for 5 hours. Like, it's not what bad parents do. Like, fuck off.
Which
right?
Also, I'm sure you have like a very good like internal buffer system for being attacked by angry moms on the internet.
I do. I have no patience for this shit after 10 years of it, right? I have better trolls than you. Yeah.
I have a favorite troll, even.
And so I responded to some of these. Then I wound up with the defenders. You know how these things go, right? Mm-hmm. I imagine you've seen enough of these things play out. So here's my experience of that moment, like baking a cake for my son. And my son thought this was hysterical. He's 12 and he thought this was the funniest thing. He's like, did you tell them I liked it?
No, that would add more fuel to the fire.
But what was funny about this was for the last, now it's been almost a month, my entire Threads experience now is nothing but parenting fights. Like, that's all it shows me now is parenting fights. And I'm like, how do I get back to the vaccines or the tech? Mm-hmm. Even the anti-vaxxers are preferable to like the nut jobs complaining about parenting. Oh
my God, rub some
So anyway, it's funny how much your social media experience is just shaped by the algorithm deciding that this is what you're going to see. And the problem is once you click on it, that's all you're going to get.
Yeah, you're there forever.
This is what's happening though over on X, where the dominant experience of it is like to be a gladiatorial arena for right-wing politics mostly at this point. Mm-hmm. But connecting this to your question on the structure front, things don't go platform-wide viral on something like Threads when the algorithm is still grouping users and keeping people in these sort of siloed experiences, as opposed to a platform like X where it does seem to be much more of this
easy to break the container.
Easier to break, broader open network, keyword-based, finds you a whole lot more stuff. So it's very much a function of, virality is very much a function of the structure and the features and the design of the platforms. The design is so key to this stuff.
But I do think, though, that like with virality, there seems to be like two sides to it. Maybe I'm wrong, but like what people make viral versus what the algorithm makes viral, is there a difference between those two things? Because I would read like the algorithm or the structure of a platform as the top-down experience for the users. I feel like, and maybe this is because I'm deluded from spending 10 years of my life on Instagram, but I feel like I have some control over the content I see because of how I engage with it and how I circulate it.
I think on a platform like Instagram, yes, for sure. On X, you'll see something that's really interesting, which is it'll show you the number of posts in a trend, and it will initially push it out to actually a very small number of people. So it'll be trending for you. And so it'll show like, sometimes I'll see a post that it'll describe as trending, but it'll be like 30 to 200 posts in the so-called trend. And there's nothing that's remotely trending about it except that this person said a thing and it got a couple dozen replies. And then it's pushing it to me as a trend with a full trend summary, because it's almost like bait, right? It's like trying as hard as it can to make it a thing. And if enough people respond to that early trend, then it gets enough signal and decides that it's going to push it out to still more, as opposed to, again, a platform like Instagram where it's a slightly different experience. You don't necessarily have that. On something like Reels now, you have a little bit more of that retweet culture, but you don't necessarily have it on the old Instagram with the grid, which I don't know if you saw this. Did you see Mosseri's post about how in the age of generative AI, we're also supposed to like post reels that make us look ugly.
No.
But that's actually how we're supposed to distinguish ourselves from AI.
Oh, because AI makes everything look perfect and pornographic.
So we're supposed to show that we are real people by being very unfiltered and raw.
Wow, this is how you make Instagram authentic again. People have been trying to do this for a long time.
I was like, all right, I guess that's one way to handle the fact that my whole grid is like sweaters that don't exist and influencers that aren't real and
yeah, AI actors. Wow, that's a good way to fight back. Yep. I think we're nearing the end of our time, but one of the like main purposes of this podcast is to leave everyone who listens, but especially Gen Zers who, you know, are deeply entrenched in the algorithms and such, with sort of a positive outcome or some sense of agency. So I have a two-sided question for you. Number one, is there positive propaganda? Does that exist? Maybe it doesn't spread as well. And number two, what can individuals do to guard themselves against algorithm manipulation? I think that maybe that like look ugly thing was a good one, but are there other things you can think of?
The positive propaganda thing, it's interesting. The term kind of came to be seen as a pejorative around World War II. This idea was like, in part because it was the U.S. framed it as like that thing the Nazis did, right? Even though the U.S. government was doing it too, of course. But it's information.
Yeah, that's agenda, propagandistic.
Like, yeah, it was. But it was this information with an agenda designed to inflect it for a particular purpose. It is very closely related to persuasion and PR and the idea that you're drawing people into a cause. I think where it's manipulative is when it takes a grain of truth and twists it. You can have persuasive communication that's perfectly ethical. You can take that 22 million number and tell people what it actually was, right? I have no problem with that. It's more when you take something and twist it. And that, I think, is the dividing line. Being out there using persuasive information, using statistics to convey a point, to say, here's a statistic and here's why you should care about it. That's activism. That is perfectly in the realm of the reasonable, whatever side of the political aisle you're on, as long as it's done in a way that is rooted in reality. I think that's where we should be striving to get back to, taking those numbers and fighting about not the reality, not what does that number mean, but what does that number then say about what we should do socially or politically or culturally. And then to the second point, things that you can be doing. I mean, there is this new feature Instagram has where you can like nuke your whole feed and start over.
What?
Have you seen that? I don't know where they hide it, but it's in there. So the interesting side effect of large language models, they're very good at rapidly classifying things. So you can actually now also see, I don't know if they've rolled this out to everybody or if it's still in beta, but you can see what your feed looks like if you search for particular keywords. So you can have a little bit more opportunity to play with your feed and see if you were to type in the word chat or politics or whatever niche term you want to put in, you can see a little bit of what kind of content you would see. You can also, I believe, reset and kind of start from zero. I think they did that as part of a parental control sort of thing, but it's in there somewhere. If you Google it, I'm sure some tech journalist wrote about where to find it. Maybe something to think about in the new year is doing a reset and deciding more consciously or more intentionally how to make your algorithm serve you as opposed to the reverse.
That's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Renee, for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Technocracy for Dummies. If you can still pronounce the word technocracy, make sure to like, follow, share, comment, subscribe. This isn't a YouTube channel, but maybe one day it will be. For the meantime, follow us on Instagram, and if you have any questions, comments, inquiries, reach out to Radio Free Rhinecliff at gmail.com, and also to Technocracy 4 Dummies on Instagram.com. Technocracy for Dummies is produced at Radio Free Rhinecliff in the Hudson Valley by Matty, Rosenberg, and Sam Simon.